All right, everybody. My name is Jamal with Creator, and we're here with the awesome Damien. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell people what you do real quick.
Hey everyone, I'm Damian, and I'm a photographer and archivist.
Cool. And you're based in Montreal currently, right?
I'm based in Montreal. That's right. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. And what brought you to wanting to shoot the type? Well, I guess first off, talk about the style that you shoot, what type of work that you do, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I think are important in my work. The first one is that when you see my images, they don't necessarily look like photographs. They look more like paintings. And that has been since the beginning. And I think one of the reasons with this is the fact that people tend to look at paintings with I think it's a lot easier to look at paintings than photographs, like to be more forgiving. So think if you see, for example, an image of something that is a little bit violent or a difficult topic, when you see a painting of a war or something like that, you don't see it and go like, oh my God, this is war. But when you see a photograph, it's a lot more difficult to process, and it can be very gory or something like that, and it's not necessarily something easy to accept. So I thought, okay, if I use the aesthetic of painting in my work, I think it would allow me to talk about difficult topics without people reacting like they were in shock. Because for me, it's really interesting or important to establish a conversation with my public rather than just shock them with the images, especially since what I want to do is communicate or change things in the world that I think, I want to make better, like gender equality or gender diversity. So that's why I have the aesthetic. And it's very produced. So at the beginning of my career, I was doing a lot more Photoshop, but now I tend to work with a lot less Photoshop. The least Photoshop that I can do, that will be the best. Even though Photoshop is a great tool, I really like to use it. But if I can do everything in the shooting, I would do that.
Cool. So from there, how did you get into this photography and art realm? Did you study that in school, or did you kind of just fall into it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I did study a lot in photography and painting. I started in communications when I was doing my bachelor's degree, and I think since that point, I started to notice that I couldn't do anything else. Like my passion is photography and art in general. So I decided to switch careers, and by that point, I won a camera in a contest, and I started to work. At that point, I was painting only, and then when I won the camera, I started to take pictures, and I decided to do my end project at school with photography rather than with painting. After that, I went to Spain, and I studied a bit of photography over there, and then I did my master's in arts with my minor in photography, and then I went to live in Paris, and I also did a course in photography. And I think it's very important to mention that when you study photography and art together, most schools won't teach you how to do photography. They will teach you what to say or how to say it. It's more the conceptual side of photography rather than, like building your sets or doing makeup and stuff like that. So most of the technical skills that I've acquired are on my own and by trying things. And the technical skills are not necessarily related only to photography, but also to the construction of the sets, doing my own makeup, or sometimes doing my costumes, or, like every part of the production. It's something that I either design, or now that I have a little bit more people around me, supervise that process, but I know how to do everything. So it sort of facilitates the communication with my collaborators. And when I said that that I came into photography in a bit of tangential or sort of like out of luck, it's because I won this camera with this research contest that I did. So before that, I didn't really even think of doing photography. So it was a happy accident.
Okay, cool. We have a question here. You already answered kind of one of it, which was, how did you find your style? You started mentioning it a little bit, but what's your process for a photo shoot, since you kind of do everything or have a team? Talk about that.
Okay, so it depends a lot if it's a commercial shoot or an artistic shoot, because commercial, usually it's a lot faster. You can take 6 months preparing a commercial shoot, though for some of my clients, I have done something similar and even stayed 4 months in the research part. So the first thing that I do, I am very thorough, and since I come from an academic background, the first thing that I do is actually to research about the topic. And the research is not only, only reading books, but also searching images about the topic that that I'm going to work with. So for example, if I'm going to work about, gender equality in Asia, I'm going to read some books about it. I'm going to search for other artists that do the same thing. Or for example, when I work for the ballet, a lot of the times, the most difficult thing is that a lot of the shows were not made at the point that we did the images. So the thing that I needed to do is go and look for videos of the choreographers that were going to be in the season, and sort of capture their style and try to guess what they were going to do with the show and do an image that would represent them. So that would take about 4 months, and sometimes my research period takes about 6 months. Then I start to look for the casting, for the people that better embody the ideas that I want to communicate. And a lot of the time I interview them so I can make sure that the right person, that they understand what the process is, that we can create a character together that can inhabit the images. Once that's done, the process becomes a lot faster, especially because I share a studio. I can't spend, like 5 months constructing a set in my studio. So what I do is I concentrate the construction of the sets maybe in a week. A lot of what you see are actually sets or locations. So there's, again, as little Photoshop as possible. I try to recreate all the environment that it's appropriate for the model to actually feel like he's in that in the environment of the final environment of the picture. Once I have the set, I also design the makeup for the shoot. I work with a custom designer, or I look for the costumes myself. And I start to think about the lighting before. So the day of the lighting, there's even like minimal testing. I already know in my head how the lighting is going to be. So sometimes it takes me, maybe it can take me up to an hour to do like a very specific lighting, but sometimes it's just 5 minutes. I put the lights and I already know, like in my head, what the intensity of each of the flashes is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I want to talk about something I think is very interesting, obviously, is you're really more of a photographer who's using, an artist who's using photography as the medium. Is that correct?
I would say so, yes.
And so I guess just talk about that. So that's kind of a different perspective. Obviously, you were mentioning it taking you 6 months to do research. You're really focusing on it and approaching it as an artist. And I guess just talk about that pathway. So it's more about getting it into a gallery and exhibits and
research.
So I guess talk about, that's like a very different perspective versus the normal photography angle, which is you do some personal work every now and then, but it's really about getting gigs and shooting for clients, etc.
I think that it's important to say that, you know, the research is also because you want to be responsible with the topics that you're treating. So, for example, if you're representing gender equality in you know, in Asia or in Russia or, you know, in Latin America, you owe it to the people that you're talking about to actually make good research about it. Like, for example, I've always thought about, you know, approaching the topic of you know, Black Lives Matter, which for me, it's something that it really touches my heart. But at the same time, for me, it's very hard that, you know, someone that looks like me can talk about that. So in a way, you know, it takes a lot of research to have exactly the right tone to talk about these things, because they're really touchy and they're really, people are very susceptible to how you're approaching your message. For me, that's very important, and I owe that to the people that I'm talking about. When it comes to, strangely, I think I make most of my income through commercial photography rather than artistic. Artistic is a career that requires a lot of patience. Things move really slowly sometimes. And when it comes to commercial, I think it's a lot more straightforward. In the sense that, you know, you try to get clients, you show your work, you get a project, and you do it, and that's it. When it comes to getting a gallery, you have to woo the gallerist, you have to send your work, you have to talk to, you know, it's sort of like who you know, who can talk about your work to other people, and that's how you start to get a little bit of, you know, of press or contacts that can move your work. So I would say that I'm still a young artist, but when it comes to photography, commercial photography, I'm in the right time to work in commercial photography. Even though I have like 17 years of working on art, I'm still a young artist, because it just takes so much time to make it in the arts and to prove that you're actually in the long run. When you're an artist, people need to know that you're gonna work for a long time in this field, that you're not just gonna, you know, take some pictures and then disappear. I don't know if this answers a little bit of the question.
Yeah, I think that definitely answered the question. Let's kind of move to a recent project you mentioned before, and I think that it kind of will encapsulate your process, but yet how everything evolved. So you mentioned the recent project offline that you were in Korea for a few months. Talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
And then are there photos on the site that we can bring up, or?
They're mostly on my Facebook page, but
okay, you can post that link. I can bring that up, I guess, and we'll.
Okay. Let me see if I can. Okay, so I'll talk about this, and then I'll post some of the images as well.
Okay. Cool.
So I've been working with gender equality since probably 10 years ago, or just, you know, basically understanding the relationships between the genders, and you know, the rules that regulate socially both things, you know, like how women are perceived, how men are perceived, like everything in between. And I think it's a very good cause. But I've been, you know, I'm Mexican, so I've been working that in Latin America, and now that I'm in Canada, I'm working here in Canada with those topics. But I didn't feel that I understood how that is presented in Asia, and I really wanted to go there for a long time. So I applied for an artist residency that allowed me to stay there 3 months and have a studio and create for 3 months. It was a very fulfilling experience in the sense that I I really wanted to challenge myself and go to a culture that was very different to mine. And I feel that the level of reward that you get from art or from photography or any of the creative endeavors is it's proportional to the level of discomfort that you're willing to feel, in the sense that going to a culture that you don't know and looking for resources in a culture that that you don't speak the language and that you've never been there, it might be very difficult. But at the same time, when you get good images, it's very fulfilling. And you have to understand that the kind of work that I do, I can't go there to Korea and just get my camera out and start to take pictures, because that wouldn't work. My work is a lot more theatrical, so I needed to look for locations. I needed to buy costumes. I needed to buy equipment over there because I couldn't travel with everything. So that takes a lot of research before, and then looking for dancers over there was also a little bit difficult because very few people speak English. So it took me about 3 months before I went to Korea to sort of get in contact with some of the dancers. That had a translator that helped me out communicate with them. When I arrived, it took me about a month in Korea to do location scouting and to start looking for costumes. So I went to secondhand stores. I even ordered some made costumes as well. Oh, that's it. That's it. You found it. It was a very enriching process to be able to direct dancers that didn't understand English or that I couldn't speak in Korean, because my Korean was really basic. I could say thank you, I could say just a few words, but most of it was sort of through a nonverbal connection with them. And it was not only trying to mimic what I wanted them to do, but it was something like really, I mean, if you can believe this, it was sort of like a little bit spiritual in a sense, like you feel the energy of the other person. And I think that, without trying to be pretentious, I think that one of my talents is actually connecting with the models in a way that it's a little bit more profound, that, when you take a portrait that takes about, 1 hour and you just sit the person there and you take the picture. I think that I have a talent for connecting with dancers and sort of feeling the same emotions as we go through the shooting.
You just want to talk about some of the images? I'll start from the beginning.
Yes.
Go back. Let me just switch to the first one.
Okay, so I think that for me, especially in this project, for me it was very important that I got to know the dancers before, and they understood exactly what we were doing, because we were talking about difficult things. So it was important for me that I didn't impose a vision of what the West thinks about the East. So the first thing that I did is I sat with them and I talked to them about the project. And once I was completely sure that they understood what they were getting into, I asked for them to propose the subjects that they wanted to talk about. So for example, this is gonna get a little bit geeky, but for example, this couple wanted to work on the women that were forced into prostitution during the Japanese colony, which was like from 1910 to 1945. And it's something that it's unresolved in Korea, that people still very, very strongly about, and it's sort of like an open wound. So for them, you know, doing images about this, it was sort of like a way of healing and, you know, and making people talk about it, even though it was going to be controversial. It's obviously very tricky to work on images where you can see the dynamic in which the man is sort of in power, and I don't think that the images are extremely violent, but you can see that there's a dynamic where the woman is not in the best position. So again, it's very important that when you're doing art and when you're doing artivism, or, you know, like activism through art, that you consider these things and you can be as subtle and as responsible as possible. I don't know if you want to go to the next one. This is actually the same couple, and it's sort of like the opposite of the other shooting. This was more about the ideals that we have about marriage, and as you can see, you know, there's a good reflection of them in the water, and for me, that represented the ideals that are sort of unattainable. There's a mix between the performance of the dance and the photography, in the sense that every time that they would move, the reflection of them would change, which is a metaphor for the way that we look at ideals. Every time that we try to attain an ideal, it will change. It will disappear and it will become something else. So that's why ideals are unattainable. So in a sense, my idea behind this picture is to try to represent the fact that, you know, sometimes the impositions that we have from society that tell us how our partnership with the people that we love is supposed to be, it doesn't always work. It works better if you create your own ideals for yourself and your own relationship, and not necessarily like specific gender roles for each of the partners in the couple. Okay. This one was more about the idea of masculinity, and I think that I'm also going to speak a little bit about the technique, because I think you guys might be interested more in also in the technique of the image. So for example, this is one of the images that it's the least retouch. I really wanted to blur the lines between photography and painting. So there are some things that I did in post-production. For example, the red line that it's going out of his body, that's in post-production. And a little bit of the smoke coming out of his body, that's obviously post-production. Otherwise, everything else is made in the place. We got this beautiful setting that was actually, if you go there, it's not really beautiful. It's a landfill that it's combined with, you know, with the subway goes through there. It's really, really not a nice place, but when you take it to photography and when you light it correctly, it just looks beautiful. So basically here I have 2 different lights. And one of the things that I wanted to do when I went to Korea is work with the minimum. So I just have a speed light on the back, which is the light that looks like the second sun. And then I have another light, a little bit more frontal and a little bit from the back. It's 45 degrees to sort of compensate a little bit the lighting on the model. And it's also the light that is lighting the blocks as well. This image in particular was about the idea of masculinity. So all the blocks that are underneath, and is that idea that masculinity, sometimes it can be a little bit heavy and a little bit square. And, you know, as men, sometimes we are not allowed to express our feelings, or, you know, or to too out there because that means that we're not like really men or something like that, you know. And the guy that danced on the blocks, he was trying to sort of channel a more feminine energy as well. So it would be a contrast between the blocks that are really heavy and him that he's really small, he's really thin, he's a little bit, you know, feminine for especially for Western standards. So yeah, that's it. I don't know if we can. This dancer was just really special. She's a traditional dancer, and she's actually wearing her marriage dress. But the idea with her basically is we don't see it that much because we from the West we wouldn't interpret this image as something that it's central. But if you go to Korea, this images, this series would have this sense of sensuality. So in a way, she was trying to express that, you know, she could be a good woman even though she was exploring her sexuality or being sensual through her dance. And the way that we worked is, even though she's a traditional dancer, I try to choreograph her into being a little bit more contemporary and having more explosive movement. I took this image around maybe 6, 7 o'clock, so the light of the sun was already a little bit indirect, and I just had 2 flashes for this. I use almost 2 flashes all the time, so I used the speed light on the left side of the image to create a rim light, and on the other side I have an Einstein with an umbrella that's just compensating again for the lack of light on the model, and just to separate a little bit the background from the model. That's I think it's more way to do it, just to light a little bit the model more than the background and create a little bit of a sense of depth. And if you can see, my images tend to be a little bit dark, and that's obviously on purpose because it gives a little bit more of a painterly look. I don't know if we can go to the next one. This image actually, it's not retouched. So you can see a little bit of how the images look before post-production. And I think that one of the things that happened in Korea is that I didn't have that many resources to create sets or to really change the places that I was going to take the pictures in. So I knew there was going to be a little bit more Photoshop in the image. But I think that for me, the important thing about doing the images was actually getting the emotion there and getting the movement and sort of getting the essence of the image. If you see the images, they're not that transformed. I mean, there's a little bit more of powder and, you know, like particles flying around. But at the end, if you see like I'm not changing the faces, I'm not changing too much of the background either. We can go to the next one. This image is also from the same series as the one before with the woman with the dress. Just a little bit of explanation about the name of the series. The series is called Songs of the Inner Chamber because at a certain point in Korea, women were separated from men. So women were sort of obliged to live inside a house, and they were not necessarily able to go out. So they would write poetry to express themselves. So in a way, I took that name and I tried to represent each of the image almost as a poem. And in this case, I mean, she's sort of outside, but at the same time, she's tied in this, you know, in this fabric. So she's inside and outside at the same time. So it sort of represents this idea of, you know, society making her not being able to express herself.
Awesome. That was great to kind of just see that and walk through that. That was kind of cool. So I guess kind of a last question to kind of wrap this up, so it's not too
Okay.
long, because we can do this forever. This is amazing. But obviously, I know you're traveling to Mexico City, correct?
Yes.
Exactly, and you're going to be doing art there as well as just taking a break because you're a very busy man. So that's so cool. So I guess, how do you see photography becoming more of a tool for, as you said, artivism, which is activism through art and messaging, obviously because of the type of environment we're in? Are you seeing more of that with your friends, your network, your ecosystem, reactions to it? What is, because before that really wasn't too much of a thing. Every now and then one photographer would do something, but it seems to be kind of increasing. And talk about how photography is lending itself to that.
I think there's a small difference between photography as a document and using photography to expose problems in other countries or, in your own country. I think it's a very powerful tool. So, any movement that is photographed, and especially now with social media, it sort of exponentially creates waves about, about what's happening in the world. So I think in that way, documentarians or photographers, street photographers, are really useful in giving power to social movements. I think the difference right now is, in my case, for example, is the mix of art with photography and with activism, which is not necessarily always the case. How I see it is, there's a lot of photographers, commercial, artists, every kind of photographer. There's a lot. So in a competing market, and when I say market, I mean it for the commercial and for the artistic and for any person that will be your client. You need to distinguish yourself. So for me, it's better to think in the long run and create a style that is recognizable and that people can hire me for that, than to be a jack of all trades and sort of maybe earn a little bit more income now. Of course, I mean, I make at least a little bit of income to live well and everything, but I think that I'm trying to establish first a style and then, get to a point where I have develop a niche market that it's basically for myself, that I distinguish myself from other artists and from other photographers. I don't know. I just think that construction of an artistic identity or a brand, for me, it's really essential. Sort of to be honest with myself and to be honest to my style as well is super important. So in a way, I think that whatever I do in my artistic work, it will sort of permeate to the commercial work as well. In my artistic work, I'm able to do things that I would never be able to do in my commercial work. But at the same time, when people see that artistic work, with possible clients in the commercial world, they can ask for that. They can see that I can take the photography a lot further than the usual images we see in publicity right now. So for me, that's really important, that I can sort of like softly push my clients to go to places that they wouldn't dare, because they can't imagine that just by looking at publicity images. Sorry, I sort of tried to answer your question, but also tried to give a little bit of advice in terms of why it's important to do artistic work or personal projects. I think that if those personal projects inform your work as a commercial photographer, you're a much better photographer for that, and you'll be freer from sort of being in a box that the advertisement world can put you in. Because a lot of the time, we think of advertisement as really avant-garde, and a lot of the time it is. But when it comes to the photographer, when it comes to shooting the photographer, a lot of the time they will tell you, okay, this is what we need. And if they can imagine something else, they won't propose it. You know, they already have an idea, and if you don't meet that idea, they might not hire you. So if you present your portfolio with other options, they might think, hey, this is wonderful as well. What if we use this style that you use for this image into your work? And in my experience, that has worked wonderfully in the sense that a lot of my clients actually want to use my artistic work to do their own promotion.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So this has been a conversation. Thanks so much for joining us here on Creator and just sharing what you do. I think a lot of people will find this very helpful to balance that commercial and artistic identity. And that's across really anything creative. Even if you're a designer working in a corporation, there's always that pull to want to be creative and put the voice out there, but then yet come up with the piece for the client. So it makes total sense. So everybody, if you're out there, you can definitely check out Damian's website on the Creator tab. He's on Instagram, he's on Facebook, he's probably on anywhere else. And definitely check out his website for more of his work. So anybody watching, you can watch the replay later here or on Facebook. So definitely, if you miss anything, check it out. And we'll be doing this again, and hopefully we'll get Damian back on here soon enough.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Damian.